I decided last night that we haven't done the 2024 IEEE Spectrum Programming Languages article. So for those that aren't software developers or software engineers like me, we wait every year for this article to come out. It's like a big freaking deal. It's come out for what, 12 years, I think it said. And it really is kind of like the industry standard for like what programming languages are up and coming, what's changed, what's hot, what's not. And this article is used, I would say, industry wide to kind of get a sense for like what programming languages are, being used in business, in academia, so on and so forth. So I thought, well, we haven't talked about it yet, so let's talk about it. And I'll kind of give kind of an intro to like the significance of the article and kind of some things that people pull from it. So I'll drop the article URL in the chat. We'll also share it so I can like point at stuff. Chat. All right, and it is interactive, so if you might want to click on it and you can play around with it while I kind of give the overview. So, oh, let me share my screen too. So, somewhat to my surprise, um, Python is like blowing away the competition in this year's survey. I mean, it's like double the ranking of the very next program language, which is also kind of surprising to me that Java is still sticking around and persistent after all these years. So, um, and then if you kind of move down the list, JavaScript and TypeScript are kind of for web development. C++ is, the old standard from, decades ago. It's still around. A lot of code being written, a lot of applications still written in C++. SQL I found less surprising. So SQL is a database language, and to call it a programming language, I think is a little much. It's basically a bunch of command. It's like basically a command. It's a way to
They've got
pull data out of a database. So you
they've got
specify like,
HTML in there. So
yeah, that's
HTML,
true. Right. So you use SQL to like basically do database queries. So to pull information out of like think an Excel spreadsheet, you pick which rows you want, how you want it sorted, which ones to pull out, like based on filtering criteria, and then it gives you the output. Um, and then Go has been climbing in recent years. So I don't know if a lot of folks know what Go is, but it's I don't know if it started at Google, but Google kind of has owned it now. A lot of Google's internal tools are now written in Go. It's like kind of their go-to language. Yuck yuck. Um, but it's also gained popularity. Like I've actually downloaded a couple models that were written in Go recently that I needed to compile. So I thought it was neat to see that raising in popularity. And then you see like Mathematica, and I was like, well, where's R? R is just like not doing great these days. Way the heck down here. Um, and so the Spectrum ranking is like for computer engineers, kind of like what computer engineers use. The trending is kind of more like what the general like more populist programming community is into. You see Python's still really high. Java's gained a little. R might have gained a teensy bit. Yeah, teensy bit. Um, but not a lot of movement there. And then what I thought was really interesting was this job. So this is what people are looking for in jobs, and SQL is huge. And this didn't super surprise me. I play, guys might know I play volleyball a couple times a week, and there's a couple programmers in the group, like younger kids, and they found out I was some of us know that we're software developers. Like there's a little subgroup of software developers, and all the young kids are like wanting to know how to learn SQL because all their employers are asking for it. So I wasn't super surprised because of that connection I have, but I'm surprised it's number one. I'm surprised too they also still want Java. That uh, I think probably web services is probably the biggest place you see Java, and then SAS is a statistical language that you use to like run stats on reports, and it's a really really popular in like business, like MIS, business information systems. It uses SAS a lot. So anyways, that's kind of like a general overview. Yeah, questions, comments, thoughts. Go ahead, Donna.
Well, I was surprised by the ordering when you sent the link earlier too, and was wondering, given that I come out of a more of an applications world rather than like a computer scientist or IEEE, what how do you distinguish? Because I know these are all programming languages, and that's how they're defined. But I always thought of SQL as a tool. I always thought of like Mathematica in a way as a tool. You know what I mean? I always thought the
Mhm.
languages were the things like Python and C++ and Fortran and things that I could do or build anything in. And the other things were set up to make my life easier. Like I know a lot of people who don't know programming at all, but they love SAS. Or so how do they, because if a job requirement, like when we're really looking for people to do databases, yeah, you want them to know SQL and like how do they distinguish the what I would call a tool from a language? Or does it not matter, or is it just a reflection of who's being hired?
Yeah,
Because Fortran has still never died among hydrologists because all of the models are still written in Fortran. And like even when we went to the Cairo conference and Gray Nearing was talking about what they're doing, he can't let go of Fortran because every single groundwater and surface water model is written in Fortran. So, but it's like impact factors on journals. There's just such a small group of people that know that little niche that it's not weighted by that tiny niche, you know?
Do you know,
no,
Pat, what is the source of the statistics here? I mean, is this a poll? Is this, licensing? Is this?
yeah. So there's actually a methodology link right here that we could go into, but that might be a little more, much into the weeds, but you're definitely interested in clicking on it. So from my past experience of this, there is a survey involved. Um, there's also like, so GitHub does something like this as well, where they kind of look at the most popular language in their repositories. And there is some of that information in this, reflected in this as well. So it is, I would say the two biggest sources are like surveys and then like public repositories is probably the biggest sources of data. And then they weight them differently depending on like which of these categories you click on at the top. Um, yeah, I mean, we could dive in here.
And it's got a question before we tangent, maybe.
I just had an observation. At at universities, people think of SAS. SAS is originally a statistical programming language, but the full SAS library, which almost no university licenses in its entirety, is actually more like SAP.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh, right, right.
it, SAS also has a database program. It also has an application interface programming language. It can do visual stuff. It can do TN3270 command line language stuff. It has built-in web servers. The full suite almost never gets touched by people in the academy. So it has a much bigger footprint and much greater utility in private industry than it does anywhere in the academy. Just so you know.
Yeah,
Um,
one of my
And
first programming jobs was actually SAS at Northwestern Mutual Insurance Company.
yeah, yeah. And
likewise for me, I loved SAS and went kicking and screaming into some of its, subsidiary, like a jump. I love now, my grad students use it, but those are all just products of the same, they took advantage of the things that you could do and made them more user friendly. So anyway, yeah, I find this fascinating. Thank you for doing this, Pat, especially at last minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, JMP is actually a totally separate product and shares no code lines with SAS.
Correct, but it's still wholly owned by
By SAS,
statistical.
right.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. And, they have other, tools because of, who they were marketing.
So SAS is, if you want to work in healthcare, SAS, you might as well, you kind of have to know SAS if you're going to do data.
Yeah, to answer your question, Donna, about what constitutes a programming language, they've had like SQL, HTML, and a lot of these like tools in here for quite a while. So they've made a decision early on, I'd say at least 6 years ago, to include those kinds of like maybe not fully baked languages, but like kind of the tooling languages. And I think the community has kind of embraced that. I think mostly because like, some of those are super important, like SQL, right?
Right.
And companies really want that. And so I think that's kind of the reason why they've stuck those in here and kept them around. Yeah, Scott.
I was just going to say, it's like anything else. If you put everybody in the same pot, and things get sort of mixed up. I think there's domains that have clear leaders. Like if you're doing web development, it's going to be C# is going to be, above Python probably. I wonder if anybody's done a more targeted, like for modeling developers or application developers, this is, the list of preferences, or if you're a web developer, these are the things you want to focus on for doing good front ends. I would think this list would switch quite a bit based on your, sort of your programming domain.
Yeah, I mean, it's a significant amount of work to put this together. I take it, given that they've done this for, 14 years, and it's kind of a big deal that when it comes out every year in the fall. And I have seen, like I said, GitHub does like much less human touch one, where they just kind of like keep track of what programming languages new repositories get created, and they release that, and that's kind of a neat, interesting thing. More around the open source community. I think I've seen one that looks more at academia, but there aren't a whole lot of I haven't seen a whole lot of what do you call it, topic specific ones, like what does biomed use, or like what do data scientists use. I think it's just because the data is kind of hard to come by.
Right. And what I loved is the fact that they're doing this by jobs, because they're letting you know what, the market wants this year. And one of the reasons, like when I teach my class, the 3 languages kids know are Python, R, and sometimes MATLAB, because those were used to, help them develop things. If I'm saying outside of engineering and computer science, but I'm forcing all my students to switch to Python because it's just an added skill that's going to be marketable regardless of whether they do what they're learning here from us, regarding hydrology or, that kind of thing. So you pick the language as a secondary thing, because that opens up more job opportunities if that's what people are using, So I love this.
The other thing that I noticed kind of interesting here, so if you look at the spectrum and the trending, JavaScript is above TypeScript, and TypeScript, I would argue, is kind of like a more generalized modern version of JavaScript. But because it's been used, JavaScript's been around for so long, it has a pretty solid handle in the things that people use. But you look at jobs, everyone wants to get on the new technology, TypeScript, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that was interesting to watch that flip when you went into like what people actually want in jobs. They kind of want the newer shiny stuff, I think, in some cases. Yeah.
And how long did you say they've been doing this? Like, could we plot the trends over years,
Yeah, this is their 11th.
Okay.
Yeah, Bennett.
A lot of it also depends on what domain you're in. So a couple of things to remember about this. One is you should separate new development from maintenance.
Yeah.
Because there are an awful lot of companies who need to hire maintenance programmers to maintain existing bodies of code. If you want to be in the sciences, you should be able to maintain Fortran code. Shelley and I can both attest from our experience at Michigan that if you're in the engineering school and you're doing simulations or weather modeling, you don't do that without Fortran. And number two is C plus plus typically, or some flavor of C. And I'm just basing that on what were the languages that we had to install for working engineers on our high performance computing cluster. And better than half of it had underlying numerical code was all written in Fortran. And then there was typically some kind of a wrapper around those numerical libraries. And in a lot of cases that was C++, but as you were saying, in more modern stuff, Python will do the wrapping. That's what NumPy is. It's just a Python interface to a bunch of Fortran libraries, or the C version of the BLAS libraries. So a lot of it is dependent on what industry you want to work in. My guess is that if you wanted to work in, for example, the financial sector, the languages that people are going to be looking for are going to be quite different from those if you want to work in healthcare. That was it.
I 100% agree. Yeah. Got
Lowered my hand.
Well, I just was digging around a little more. I was interested to see that Arduino snuck in there. And for those who don't know, Arduino is a small development platform for microprocessors, a single, computer on a card kind of things. But it has the details kind of twisted. It says that it's Java based, and it's like, well, no, it's C and C++ based. And that platform now also has Python options. So I don't know. There's some wrinkles in here someplace underneath the covers where I don't think they quite got it.
When I was messing around with Arduino, almost all of the Arduino was wrapped in Python libraries.
Yeah, I use CircuitPython now, which is and there's also MicroPython, which are mini kernels. But it's nice as far as an interpretive language, basically. But yeah, I was thinking, never heard of anybody claiming that Arduino was Java based. It's C. Anyway, just an observation.
I was a little surprised that Ruby was so far down there. I had thought that Ruby on Rails had greater penetration than it obviously does.
Well, that's why I was thinking domain. I think if you were to just poll a bunch of web developers, Ruby would be right up there. C# and Ruby on Rails would be, at least the last time I was going through the job market looking at what people were looking for. They have some very specific keywords that they're typically putting in their job listings and such, and those were on there. Those were bundled together. That's what they wanted you to have.
I love that shell. That shell's a language that's kind of like falls into the SQL category.
Yeah, do they have Rex? Yeah.
So I'm curious for the students, what's like the lowest language on the score that or on the scale that you've actually worked in? I actually took Pascal was just getting phased out when I started computer science. They were moving to Java as like the teaching language.
I can't quite see everything. Is MATLAB on there?
It is.
Yeah. Fairly high up, actually.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
Well, I cut my teeth on assembler. So I mean that's what you did if you needed any performance on the old iron mainframes. But I noticed they also had some hardware programming. They had Verilog. Verilog is a net listing programming. It's a logic programming. It's like how you design chips. Functional blocks. How you connect the pins. So it's like there's a pretty broad swath here.
So, Pat, generational differences. When the first time I got experience with programming, Pascal was just coming in to replace either BASIC or Fortran, depending on which college you were in.
Yeah.
The
I actually
Lisp
took a
is still
I actually took a
hanging out in there.
class where I had to learn Lisp and Ada.
Oh
It
man.
was like a programming language class. We did like a bunch of different programming languages over a semester, like one little project in each. But it was neat because you got to see the differences in them. Like Ada is I don't know if I can even click on it, but it was originally developed for the Department of Defense. And it's like
Yeah,
a
weird
language that
language.
has like everything. Has
yes.
like everything that was ever invented for programming languages is in Ada.
But
And it's weird, the weirdest language to program in, with all the little dominoes and
Yeah. Cool.
so
Pat, what
Shelley and
was
I
the
have had to deal with Lua.
Right.
what
If
was
you're a gamer, I think World of Warcraft actually
It
has a
is.
Lua programming interface.
Yep, it does. Sorry, someone was trying to speak up. Was that you, Shelley?
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah.
I
What's
was
up?
just gonna say, yeah, I'm definitely not a programmer, but when I started out as a scientist before I switched over to IT, um, I worked in research and seismology research, and we collaborated with a scientist at MIT, and he was a bit older than I was probably in my 20s when I started there, and I worked there for about 10 years. But I worked closely with him, and the majority of his code was that he wrote in Fortran. And so I spent a lot of time helping debug his code, not actually writing Fortran, but I got, I don't know, familiar with it enough that I could find where things weren't done right, where the problem was.
Sure. Yes, Scott?
I was just trying to figure out what the spectrum slice is versus the trending slice. I mean,
Yeah,
jogs is kind of obvious.
it gives you this little thing down here. Here you go. Spectrum rating is weighted towards a profile of a typical IEEE member. So think like
Oh,
the
spectrum is
software
an IEEE
engineering.
spectrum, their
Yeah,
publication.
yeah. Trending is more for the zeitgeist. So like the more broader programming community.
At one point, I was an IEEE member, but that was quite some time ago.
I didn't do the full list. Are there any NoSQL languages on this list?
Yeah, I don't not that ring a bell with me, but I don't know what all those would be.
I mean, in some ways, this is a little bit like the Dow Jones or the stock indices, right? Languages
Sure.
get added and taken off and so forth. So there's nothing in here about CouchDB or MongoDB, for example.
Right. Well, any other thoughts? We don't have to spend the whole time on this, but I thought it was kind of an interesting little, I think, reflection, like a dive into kind of the broader software engineering community and to see what folks are using these days. And
Oh yeah, you're just looking for that hammer to make people say, no, don't do R, do Python.
I thought it was very interesting.
I'm always looking
Yeah.
for that hammer, Scott.
Yeah, I know. That
So-
hammer.
So just out of curiosity, I worked with a guy, still a friend of mine. I don't work with him anymore. Who said really there are three programming languages that everybody should have some experience and exposure to, and they were C, Smalltalk, and Lisp. And he said C because it's the original, right? It's the sort of the systems programming language. Lisp because it's the finest example of a tail recursion language, and people don't know, that whole AI kind of language stuff is hard to get your head around, and Lisp is a pretty good start on that. And then Smalltalk was basically the originator of object orientation and all that good stuff. So just out of curiosity, right? Obviously, you can learn languages because you get a job with them, or because they're used in their field. But in terms of if you want to be an educated computer scientist about how languages work, which ones would you pick?
I would have put
Is that a
Fortran
question
in there
just-
someplace.
Yeah.
Fortran was very engineering, formula driven, crank through your equations.
Yeah, I think Lisp is a great example for the recursive languages, the what do they call them? The functional languages, and that it's so different than everything else that most people get, that most people run into. I think it's really good to like understand that this is a very powerful class of language. So I think Lisp is a great one. I agree with C. Like, so much stuff is built on C these days. I mean, Linux is built on C, and with the C++ and the object-oriented stuff in it, I think having you'll probably run into that at some point in your lifetime. And then, yeah, I think Smalltalk is fine. I learned on Java, which is also object-oriented in its core. That's really what it was designed around. It has all the inheritance keywords, and it's really powerful when you use it in an object-oriented way. I might replace Smalltalk with Java, but I think that's a pretty solid list that professor came up with.
He used to talk about von Neumann, basically a complete defined language was, something between Turing and then referred to as von Neumann architectures. And that's gets you into the C, and I mean those are examples of fully defined languages that basically you can do it all with.
Yeah.
As opposed to some of these more niche languages that are good at a couple of things, but not general purpose.
Bennett, I think your point's really well taken. Like any of the students on this, and researchers on the call know that when you work with me to do some software programming, I know no Python. Like, you see me Googling Google like constantly, right? Because I don't know what the syntax is. But I know all the languages that fed into Python. And I know what Python should have and what it should look like and how to create a class and how to structure a class and what it should look like. And I think Bennett's point gets right at that, is that, programming syntaxes come and go and they change, and what the libraries of programming languages contain come and go. But like the core programming concepts that you learn in like, a C++ or Java with object-oriented or Lisp with functional programming, like those are applicable to any new language that comes along. And so I think that, Bennett makes a really good point that there's a couple core languages that if you kind of know those, you can kind of figure out anything that comes your way, whether you know the syntax or not, because Google's there to help you out.
I'll put I don't know 45 years of programming history on the table and say that once you learn the first 3 or 4, they're all the same, and they're all a blend in my head. I have to look up. I need the manual or the reference or something to get the exact syntax, because they all end up being, conditionals and loops and objects and, mix and match as you need to. And thank goodness there's syntax assist text editors now to make sure you got the braces in the right places and the right semicolons and such. Pascal, put that semicolon on the end of every line.
But what I loved about the question, Bennett, and this comes out of just having read a couple of books, because I work with folks now in linguistics, and the wiring of someone's brain when they learn, I'm talking about just regular languages. Like if you think in multiple languages, you think entirely differently about problems and the advantages of that, and why it's so important that children perhaps should learn more than one language when they're young. What I loved about the languages I learned from a computing standpoint is I started with Fortran because I was an engineer and we were doing groundwater modeling and climate modeling. And the frustration that I went through to learn that language and the way it makes you think about the problem that you're trying to solve, I fell in love then with ANNs in the 80s, and I was forced to learn Lisp for kind of the reasons that you were alluding to. And it made you think in a very different way. Like that was the part that was fun. Oh, this language does this, and that's why. And then, the next language I learned was C, then went to C++. And I was blown away because of the object-oriented component of it. And like Pat, you're just saying, I don't program in Python, and I just can still read my students' code because you know enough languages. But I loved the languages that were completely different, because even MATLAB, when I first learned it, was the only thing that was really vectorized at the time. If you really want to do linear algebra, so talk about, and then SQL, if you wanted to do that, you're thinking in a very different way about how you want to organize data. So I love the question that you asked. There's not going to be one language, right? But it's fun to torture your brain to think completely differently if you learn a couple of these languages that are really designed differently. I love books on like how we should design computers. Jeff Hawkins, when he's talking about, he hated the way we design computers with a central processing system, and it forces you to think a certain way. That's not necessarily good or bad, but it's definitely can hinder creativity sometimes. So anyway, I really love this article, Pat. I'm so happy you made us talk about it.
So again, talking about the mythical, a friend of mine. We had Shelley will tell you that we had a number of groups of IT people from various parts of the University of Michigan. And if there were more than 2 units involved, they became contentious. And one of the things that we noticed was that you could tell what people's programming language favorites were based on how they wanted to organize their work groups as well. A hardcore Fortran programmer set up the hierarchy of who bossed who and what the reporting mechanisms were and how you talk about project planning and so forth. Was very different from the people who came from the telecom community who used message passing a lot. and so on and so forth. So it's also sort of interesting that people's psychology will influence which languages they like. And I think vice versa. Sometimes the computing languages, if you get heavily involved with it, will change the way you think about how you operate with your coworkers as well. Shelley.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on like some things that Donna and Scott were saying about, Scott started out with talking about how knowing multiple languages gets you to a point where you sometimes have to, even though you may know the languages well, you get them jumbled up and you have to go to a reference to get the right syntax for the language that you're working on at that moment in time. And when Donna started talking about linguistic languages, it reminded me of my experience. I grew up, or in school, I took many years of Spanish, and then I ended up moving to Germany for a couple of years because of my husband's work. And so then I had to learn German, and I had all this German in my head, and we took a side trip to Spain, and I was so excited because I could use my Spanish. And when I would open my mouth, this jumble of Spanish and German would come up. And I was like, oh my God, what's happening to me? I had 6 years of Spanish and I can't get the words right. But I can see that even in my minimal programming experience that, you can easily, in the same way, start to mix up programming languages just based on what you've been working with most recently and what's in your head.
Well, just think how it shapes your creativity. I'm sorry, Pat, you should just kick me out or but
Well, all of us old folks are talking too much.
yeah, but Peter and I, my husband and I were
I'm speaking for myself,
visiting,
not anybody else here is old.
we're visiting a friend's house and they specifically raised their 4-year-old. Mom only speaks in English and dad only speaks in Spanish, specifically so the child will be able to understand both languages, and that each is doing their own native language, obviously. And when Peter and I went over there to visit, the child was speaking perfectly well to me. And then Peter, my husband, asked something and they wouldn't speak to Peter. And he asked again and still wouldn't speak. And then the dad, Chase, came over and said, "Come on, why are you not answering Peter?" And he says, "But Daddy, he's speaking in the girls' language." And we just realized that all the people that Kate had spoken to, in the house when the child was young, they're all speaking English. And then Dad comes in and speaks Spanish. So, think of how that's shaping the way you think about languages. This guy is speaking to me in the girls' language.
Just
amazing.
Anyway.
To extend that, if you get enough languages, I find that like the learning the second language was at least as hard as the first, because you kept bumping up against all the differences and it would break you. But as you add to those, I find that adding additional languages or just picking up somebody's code that's in a language you've never learned, it's a lot easier to sort through it now, because I think I find that you find the similarities. It's like, oh, this is branching, and this is conditionals, and this is looping, and it's not about the braces and the semicolons and the commas. It's constructs. And if you generalize, I just find that once you've generalized the concepts, picking up another language comes quicker. That's my experience.
One other thing that I think is really valuable about having to do some work in multiple languages has a lot less to do with the languages themselves, but how the languages interact with the computers that they're running on. And so as an intellectual exercise, and in one case, actually, as a set of interview questions, what we did was we gave interviewees 3 error messages from 3 different languages and asked them to tell us what was the underlying problem that this error was identifying for you. And it's often the case that people will concentrate so much on the syntax and the conventions of the language that they forget about how to figure out how the language is actually dealing with the machine that you're on, and where the sources of error are and what you have to check, and how data errors and other sorts of things can be introduced into otherwise perfectly well-written code. So classics are typically IO and memory management, right? If you've got if you have something that's threaded, how do you do thread safe operations on shared memory? And if you're doing IO and you have, as we had in the HPC centers, you've got 1,000 processors that are all accessing the same file at the same time. How do they read and write data properly? And what are the tools that have been developed to make that possible? So anyway, I highly recommend, right, that if you were looking for something that would be really cool, would be to come up. Has everybody seen the collections that they have of Hello World in every language known to man, or people, I guess, right? I think it would be really great to have a collection like that of error messages from every language, just so you can see. I mean, the first time I saw Python traceback, oh my God.
or most frequent faux pas. It's like, oh, did you, when you're doing your C strings, did you remember your extra character for your end of string marker?
Right. Yeah. Hello, buffer overflow, rootkit.
Yeah. There's a very distinctive, I've done the same stupid thing in this language 20 times kind of. I feel like, oh yeah, that's this language, and it always works that way.
Yeah.
Zero indexing versus one indexing, all that sort of, there are things that definitely, like I say, will break you if you don't generalize.
Right.
If you focus on the differences, it can be very aggravating.
Yeah. Malloc without free or freeing a null pointer. So
I think there's a whole generation of programmers who don't understand memory management because they never had to do it themselves. It's
right.
just happens for you. There's no mallex going on out there anymore.
For those, especially for the students, there's a book that I thought was really cool because I do almost no original programming. Everything I do is maintenance programming, and it's almost always getting somebody else's project to work on the computer that I happen to be supporting. And one of the coolest books that I ran across was called, I think it was called Code Reading or Reading Code by Greek guy. Yeah, Code Reading by Diomedes Spironellis. Here, I'll see if I can get the link pasted into the chat for you guys. And basically, it's a book not about writing code. I'll put the Amazon thing in the chat here. Not about writing code, but it's about, okay, you have to compile somebody else's open source code. How do you figure out what somebody else wrote? Because writing your own code, you have no one but yourself to blame. You're familiar with your own idiosyncrasies. But especially when you get code that's written by a committee, and you've got 3 people were working on this library and 4 other people were working on this other library, and all of the examples in it were pulled from real open source projects. So you could actually go out to GitHub and get the code that he was talking about to see it in the broader context if you want it. But it was really cool. And he's got a follow-up book. I think if you scroll down, it'll probably be in the also bought. It's a much older, the code quality book is also, those are worth reading. I think UVM Library has both of them available as online reading. Anyway, I thought it was really interesting because it was the first time that I'd seen a book that actually addressed what my main problem was, which was not how to write code, but how to figure out what somebody else had written. And he argues, and I think I agree with him, that they're related but very different skills. So somebody can go download a bunch of Haskell code.
Yeah. Even like just looking at, our team, Scott, me, and Noah, like we all write very different Python code. Like I can look at a piece of code, I know who wrote it. I know if it's my fault to blame or Noah's fault or Scott's fault to blame just by looking at the code. It's very distinctive. It's like our own dialects, kind of the same language. I find that pretty interesting too. If there's list comprehension, it's probably me.
Okay, so I don't know whether it's an attribute of a language. It's like how I won't say sneaky, how complex, how dense, how densely code. How much can you get done in one line? Lisp was big on that, and Ada was big on that. You could just collapse everything down to a single line of incomprehensible, stringing of byte functions. I don't like to write that way. It runs really well, but I'll never remember what it does when I come back to it in 2 years.
Perl actually had a formal contest on most obscure one-liners.
Yeah, that's I mean, tricky code that's really efficient to me is it's almost, I want to say short-sighted in that you'll never remember how you did it or how to do it again when you come back to it, and a couple of years later when it's time to review something or fix something. So that's what Pat would say, that I'm out stodgy. I'm procedural. I want to break it up in a few lines. It doesn't hurt. It's really it's gonna run just as quick when it's done. Definitely want to do those vectorizations though. There's a clear winner there. for all of that matrix math stuff. But
I don't know if
coding
I've
styles as much as the language.
Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned it here, but one of the other things that often gets neglected in languages and training people on languages is how and when do you comment and for whom? And Shelley and I have both had to work with basically untrained students who come with a fair amount of, you know, desire and curiosity, but not a lot of experience. And so, especially in my work with research labs, where then that's coupled with virtually no training in computer science, we fared a little better when we hired them at the HPC Center because they usually had computer stuff. But I always wanted code to be commented in such a way that real programmers would just whine that, God, there's so many comments in here, I can't tell what the code is doing. But I wanted comments to explain what the code was doing to people for whom this might actually be the first shell script they ever saw. And a lot of times now, I will tell people, don't worry about making the machine efficient. Machines are big, they're fast, they have lots of memory, they have tons of disk. You want to save the time of the researcher because that's a resource that you can't get any more of. So
I'll err on the side of commenting why I did not do it a particular way. It's like I tried this and it didn't work, so don't go there.
yeah. So anyway, commenting, documenting your code. I think it's way out of fashion, but have any of the students have heard of literate programming?
I haven't heard of literate programming.
I'm sorry?
I haven't heard of literate programming.
So y'all remember Don Knuth, right? Probably.
I know that name, yeah.
So Knuth is famous for two things. He's got a multi-volume set on algorithms. He was one of the originators, basically, of analyzing algorithms for efficiency. And the other thing he's notable for is he's the inventor of the TeX typesetting language, which some of you may have run into. And he developed a theory of literate programming that combined the documentation with the code. And if you've ever used R Markdown, that's basically a form of literate programming. And you create a file, the file contains text chunks. And in Don's case, he wrote it in TeX. And then it contains blocks of code. And then he wrote programs called Tangle and Weave that will separate out the code from the mix so that it can be compiled into standalone code. And then he had the Weave that separated out the comments and formatted everything so you could print it as a book. And that's basically what R Markdown, the whole idea behind R Markdown, or what's the other one? I think Python notebooks.
Python notebooks, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It's basically like that. So it's sort of it's kind of out of fashion in some ways, but it is still a cool idea that you should tie the code and the explanations of the code into the same files with the code. And then when you want to use it, you have a program that will extract the part that is supposed to, be compiled and becomes the program. So again, right, there's more than just the language itself. There's the commenting conventions, there's your audience, there's what are you really trying to optimize? Is it the computer? Is it the person? Is it the programming hours? I mean, I have a friend who writes in Python, but he uses it entirely as a prototyping language, and everything that goes into production, he rewrites in C++.
Sharia dropped a link to Knuth's book on literate programming, so thanks, Sharia.
Oh, cool, thanks.
Yeah, and once again, I think it goes back to choice of language. Is a lot about domain. I mean, is this something you're going to run a lot for a month, get your results, and then move on? Or is this something that is going to be, you know, holding up the foundation of a Fortune 500 company, you know, their billing and ordering system? Very different needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fortran versus COBOL versus, you know, Pascal, to name three somewhat dusty languages.
Well, I had a friend in the late 90s, and he made enough money between 1995 and 2004 that he was able to retire at 38 because he was a really good, really fast COBOL programmer. And
Millennium Bug.
he made really big bucks in the Bay Area going through people's COBOL code trying to find Y2K bugs.
Oh yeah. I was at IBM at the time, and they had a whole departments of people that were relocated and dispatched to work on customer, you know, installs to just make sure that everybody's company specific app was going to stay running.
Well, we're coming for time, so thanks everyone for the discussion. I'm glad this was maybe this week for us old folks more than the young folks.
Yeah, I was going to say I didn't hear a lot of our newer folks weighing in.
But I think there's some good snippets to take out of it from some of us that have been around the block a couple times. So so I will put this up online, and we'll see everyone in 2 weeks for another edition of the RCD seminar. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye. Thanks.